Roar!
Ew.
Chapter 7 Per Man's Warhorse. Is this what it feels like to prepare for war? Ever since he left the library with Applejack, Stephen's heart had been growing heavier and his stomach had tied itself into several knots.
What exactly is going on tonight?
He asked as he walked through the dusk-lit town of Ponyville.
We're making sure the Timberwolves don't come into town.
Applejack said.
Did I hear that you already had experience with them?
According to Fluttershy, they're what chased me out of the forest a couple of nights ago. Although I still don't know what they are.
Not many ponies do. What we do know is that they come out of the ever-free forest around the start of Zap Apple season.
Okay, remember that I'm not from Equestria? I don't know what any of this stuff is. Why don't you start from the beginning and tell me what you know?
Applejack sighed at Stephen.
No pony knows much about the ever-free forest other than it's not natural and don't work the same as the rest of Equestria. Twilight thinks it's because of a strange magic that resides there and goes dormant when winter comes around. Winter weather makes the trees lose their leaves and a lot of their branches. When we wrap up winter and spring comes, the magic wakes up and brings the whole forest to life for a week. The apple trees come back to life and grow the most delicious, colorful pieces of magical fruit you ever did taste in your life. That's a Zap apple. But those fallen leaves and dead branches come together and start howling and looking for food. That's a Timberwolf. Then at the end of spring's first week, the magic settles down, the Timberwolves fall apart, and Zap apples disappear.
Stephen stopped walking so he could try to comprehend everything he had just heard. After a moment he gave up.
None of that makes any sense. Are you telling me I got chased out of a forest by a bunch of sticks and leaves?
The thought of getting chased by inanimate objects made Stephen a little upset with himself.
Do these things hunt ponies?
They sure do. That's why we gotta chase them off the farm and keep them from going into Ponyville.
Stephen's heart sank to a new low when he heard that. There was some comfort in knowing that his fears from 2 nights ago were justified. But, that being known, he was even less enthralled about going out to confront them. Applejack had to double back and push him to get him walking again.
And don't you fret. I won't let anything happen to you.
Well, that's good.
Stephen droned sarcastically, dragging his feet as he walked.
Now I feel much better about the idea of chasing after a pack of carnivorous tree bark.
Applejack stopped pushing Stephen.
Well, here we are.
Applejack pointed to a sign over the end of the driveway reading, Sweet Apple Acres. As Stephen approached the large barn-shaped house at the top of the hill, he took in the sights of apple trees planted in neat rows for as far as he could see. The estate was huge. The front field alone was at least 15 acres. Applejack trotted ahead of Stephen.
Hustle up there, Stephen.
Picking up his pace, he followed Applejack into the house. Once inside, an affectionate border collie greeted Applejack, who lovingly nuzzled her in return.
Winona, say hi to our guest.
Applejack commanded. As the dog looked up at Stephen, he half expected her to talk, like the ponies. With a frantically wagging tail, Winona let out a pleasant-sounding bark. Perhaps there were some normalcies in this world after all.
Good girl, Winona. Come on, Stephen. You gotta meet the whole family.
Stephen followed Applejack into the family room, where he was introduced to Applejack's nuclear family. There was a wrinkled green pony reclining in a rocking chair. Her nappy white mane was tied into a bun. This combination of things that Stephen never thought he'd seen was introduced to him as Granny Smith.
Ain't he a delightful young whippersnapper?
Granny Smith said with a laugh.
We're always in need of a good help around here. You will do a fine job, Sonny.
Applejack spun Stephen around and brought him face to chest with a red-coated wall of muscle.
This is my older brother, Big Macintosh,
said Applejack. Until now, Stephen had been slightly taller than all the ponies he'd met. But Big Macintosh was at least a head taller and 100 pounds heavier than Stephen. Stephen had to back up a couple of steps so that proper eye contact could be established. An orange unkempt mane sat on top of his head, and he wore a yoke over his shoulders.
It's nice to meet you,
Stephen said. Big Mac merely nodded in return. Applejack's younger sister, Applebloom, was a ball of energy with a yellow coat and pink bow decorating her red mane. The little pony was ecstatic to have company helping them chase the Timberwolves until she caught a glimpse of Stephen's flank.
How come you ain't got a cutie mark, mister?
Applebloom asked.
Applebloom, don't you be rude to our guest.
Applejack reprimanded her sister. Stephen wasn't exactly sure how to answer. He looked around the room, noticing that everyone else's, except for Applebloom and herself, had a mark of some kind.
I really don't know.
Don't you have any special talents?
Applebloom asked.
Applebloom, stop pestering Stephen.
Applejack shouted again. Applebloom didn't seem to notice her sister.
Did you get picked on as a foal too?
The way she spoke made Stephen believe that having a cutie mark was a big deal. But he had neither the time nor the knowledge to explain the situation. So how could he answer in a way that would dismiss the subject?
This really wasn't an issue when I was growing up.
Seemed to be a fitting answer. Applebloom hopped onto Stephen's back and stood proudly.
Well, I know I'm getting my cutie mark tonight.
Stephen found the young pony's enthusiasm amusing. It was like how a child would expect to tackle a carnival game and win every prize. Plus, it was a welcome distraction from his churning insides.
Really? What's your cutie mark going to be?
I'm gonna get my cutie mark and whoop in some Timberwolves.
Applebloom.
Applejack tackled her little sister off Stephen's back. The ponies wrestled playfully for a minute, ending with Applejack pinning Applebloom and rustling her mane.
Come on, you little filly. It's time to suit up.
The words suit up were like knives in Stephen's heart. Suiting up was a process of tying pots and pans together under Granny Smith's supervision. After about an hour of preparing the wares, the ponies tied each other up. Once Big Mac was set, he fastened the set of pans over Stephen's back. Several more were tied to his legs, and one was strapped atop his head like a helmet. By the end of it, everyone looked like a poor man's version of armoured war horses. The makeshift armour clinked and clanked with every movement.
And what?
Granny Smith's voice called into the kitchen. Like soldiers, Big Mac, Applejack, Applebloom, and even Wyona fell into line and stood at attention. With a bit of clanging, Stephen set himself at the end of the line. Granny Smith, adorned in a war helmet, walked the line at a snail's pace. Why did she get an actual helmet while Stephen was stuck wearing pots? Stephen had sweat coming down his face. He looked ridiculous. He felt like he was on his way to Battle of Normandy. Granny Smith's hips squeaked as the rusty door hinged when she walked. All of this together made it very difficult for Stephen to keep his composure.
Now, listen here, troops. Tonight's the night you all carry the legacy of Sweet Apple Acres. I want each and every one of you little ponies to go out there and show them cotton-picking Timberwolves what's for. So I better not see any one of you putting down anything less than everything you got.
She stopped and looked Stephen dead in the eyes.
Do I make myself clear?
She shouted into Stephen's face and stamped the ground. Stephen's fear-induced paralysis kept him from jumping out of his skin. This old grey mare could probably still kick his rear end. How is it she wasn't going out with them?
Because of my bad hips, this will be your first year you chasing off the Timberwolves without my help. We got a rookie in our ranks, so listen careful now. All you gotta do is run around the edge of the forest. Those Timberwolves will be on a howling something fierce and trying real hard to get onto the farm. Make as much noise as you can and you'll scare them off. Any questions?
Ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Ma'am.
The Apple family resounded. Even Wyona barked a response. Stephen, however, was too nervous to speak.
Now fall out!
Granny Smith saluted her family, Stephen saluted back with them. The Apple family filed out of the house and into the field behind it. They had almost 500 yards to walk to the edge of the orchard, where the forest began. For Stephen, each step was like lifting a lead weight. All he knew was that he was turning himself into bait and quite literally presenting himself to his hunter. Stephen froze again, his armour rattling with his fearful palsy. Applejack turned around and trotted back to meet him.
Whoa there, Sugar Cube. You're shaking like a rattlesnake. Why so nervous?
You know exactly why I'm nervous.
Stephen snipped at Applejack.
Try not to get too worked up there, buddy. My Granny Smith's been doing this since she was young.
Last week, I ran away when a squirrel fell out of a tree and landed next to me. How the heck am I supposed to chase off a wolf?
Applejack seemed frustrated with him for a moment before her face softened into a compassionate smile. She placed a hoof over Stephen's shoulder and said,
Listen to me. What I'm telling you is the honest truth. Just stay close to me and you'll be safe.
On cue, howls rang out from the forest. They were close. Applejack reared up and cried out, before bolting straight towards the edge of the forest, clanging like a rusty tin man the whole way down. The others weren't far behind. The battle with the Timberwolves had barely begun, and Stephen had already made his first mistake. Stephen had seen enough Discovery Channel to know that the animals that fall onto the back of the herd are the first to be picked off by predators. Now his unwillingness to move had just put him in that exact situation.
Stephen, you moron! Applejack even told you to stay close to her.
Weighing his options, he first considered that maybe he didn't need to go all the way into the edge of the forest. Perhaps he could run around here and chase back any Timberwolves that happened to get through the others. But what about the animals at the back of the herd that always get picked off first? However, if he were to run with the Apple family, he would be physically closer to the Timberwolves and thus more likely to be taken. What about the animals at the back of the pack that always get picked off first? Torn between options, Stephen started trotting in place.
What am I worried about? Isn't this just a dream? Or what if it's really not a...
He thought, lifting his front legs to move forward.
The animals at the back of the herd always get picked off first in this world too.
Seriously, Brain? I cannot handle this type of betrayal right now.
Remembering the bruises he woke up with that morning, Stephen decided that counting on this being a dream wasn't the best idea. If by chance he wasn't dreaming, being at the back of the herd and getting eaten was not an appealing concept. Besides, Applejack promised she'd look out for him, right? She promised he would be safe. Stephen would just have to have faith that she was telling the truth. When these pieces of logic came together, Stephen's legs went into autopilot and he charged towards the edge of the forest. As he approached, he could see Big Mac, Applejack, and Applebloom running back and forth, drawing closer the ringing metal. Applejack's cheering and Wyona's barking began to overpower the Timberwolf's howls. Only once did Stephen dare to look into the forest and see sets of glowing eyes staring right back at him.
Eyes forward, Stephen. Don't look at them.
He reminded himself. Locating Applejack, Stephen ran alongside her. The moonlight caught her face as she turned her head and gave him an approving smile. Her silent reassurance easing Stephen's fear. For a few minutes they ran together and Stephen felt safer just as Applejack had promised. Suddenly Applejack stopped and double-backed. Stephen tried to match her footwork, only to cross his two front legs and topple over like an unstable house of cards. Why did he try that? He'd just gotten the hang of running on all fours. Fancy footwork was still out of the question. By the time he looked up, Applejack was clear across the field. He had fallen behind yet again. Stephen scrambled to his feet. When he got up, a growl and a bark came from behind him, chilling his spine and freezing his whole body in place. With morbid yet reluctant curiosity, Stephen slowly forced his head to look over his shoulder. 4 horrible glowing yellow eyes pierced through Stephen's soul. 2 wolf-shaped bodies came into the moonlight, looking like poorly made wooden puppets with jagged, uneven and sharp edges. Antlers made from tree branches protruded from their heads. The creaking and cracking sounds that came from their joints contradicted the graceful appearance of their movements as they advanced on Stephen with the same fearsome charisma of a real wolf. One of them growled and revealed several wooden stakes in its mouth, each so sharp that they shone in the moonlight. Applejack was right. These creatures were not natural. One of them raised its head to the moon and let out a blood-chilling howl.
Applejack!
Stephen shouted, hoping she could hear him from so far away and over the noise of battle. Stephen took off like a frightened horse. It was times like these that Stephen was glad he was a pony. Adrenaline or not, he knew what 30 miles per hour felt like, and he knew that he'd never be able to run this fast as a human, even in a dream. Helping Stephen continue at this speed was the sound of the Timberwolf's barks and wooden feet thumping on the ground just behind his flanks. Stephen's back hooves smacked against one's jaw when it got too close to his tail. Where was Applejack? Didn't she promise to help him? Stephen could see the moonlight caressing the cobblestone walls and thatched roof of a well about 10 yards away. If he could hide behind it, he might have a chance. Instead, he tripped over himself with about 3 yards to go. His fate would have been sealed if the Timberwolves hadn't pounced at the same moment he tripped. They flew over his head and collided with the cobblestone well. Stephen tried to get to his feet, but by the time they would cooperate, it was too late. Not only were their Timberwolves back up, but they looked even angrier. Wrapping around the side of the well, Stephen tried again to hide behind it. When the Timberwolves persisted, he rattled and screamed to no avail. The Timberwolves inched closer still. Now that he thought about it, they had chased him all the way to the barn while he was making that noise and were unaffected. Of the entire pack, why did Stephen have to get the alphas? Or maybe they simply weren't afraid of the noise anymore, now that they had pinned him, petrified and out of ideas. The only certainty was that he was about to find out if this was a dream or not. If it were a dream, being killed here would definitely wake him up. If not, he wished he had paid more attention in church as a kid so he could remember which prayer to say. A distant metal clanging quickly grew louder and closer. Applejack was here. Stephen was going to be safe after all.
Don't worry, I gotcha!
Came a voice that sounded too young and high-pitched to be Applejack.
You get your mighty sticks away from him, you nasty Timberwolves!
Applebloom shouted as he approached at full gallop. Stephen didn't want her here. She was just a child. What if she found herself in the same type of trouble he was in? His fears were confirmed when one of the Timberwolves turned around and barked in her face. Applebloom, until now, had been staying near her brother and successfully warding off the pack. She wasn't at all prepared for one to stand its ground against her. Startled and confused, she fell over, not knowing what to do. She was almost as paralyzed with fear as Stephen. However, her lungs were still working, so she used them to their full potential by letting out an ear-piercing, fear-filled screeches into the night. One Timberwolf approached Applebloom with a hungry look in its eyes, while another did the same to Stephen. Desperate for a solution, he noticed that he was still within reach of the well. The bucket was hanging over it, and in line with the Timberwolf's head. If he pulled the bucket close to one of the roof's posts, he could swing it around like a tetherball and hit the wolf. But there was no guarantee it would do anything, and even if it did, it might just draw the Timberwolves' attention back to Stephen. Despite Applebloom's cries, the Timberwolves continued their advance. Stephen kept trying to move, but was frozen in place. He didn't want Applebloom to get taken too. He'd never been in a situation like this before. How was he supposed to act? Horrible images of various possibilities flashed through Stephen's head. One of the Timberwolves ganging up on Applebloom. One of Stephen staying still and they both get eaten. One of Stephen lashing out and sacrificing himself to save Applebloom. And one of Stephen saving them both. He simply couldn't do it. A man who spent his whole life avoiding conflict would never be able to protect anyone. Stephen was disgusted with himself as fear bound him like ropes. Unable to help, he could only resign himself. The nightmare would be over momentarily. Whichever fate awaited Stephen and Applebloom, he just hoped it wouldn't hurt. After what sounded like a gunshot, the demonic collection of cavalier timber to Stephen's left yelped and flew away several feet. Big Mac was in its place, landing back on all fours from the powerful buck. When Stephen's Timberwolf got it to its feet, Big Mac rattled himself extra hard as he chased it off. To Stephen's right, a rope appeared from his peripherals and wrapped around the neck of Applebloom's Timberwolf. The rope led several feet over and into Applejack's mouth. With a muffled,
"Get over here!"
Applejack yanked the Timberwolf away from Applebloom. Turning around, she bucked the Timberwolf airborne. Without even giving it a chance to land, Applejack let out a victorious
Yee-haw!
and lunged through the air to headbutt the Timberwolf in the gut. She then curled up in mid-air and thrust both her hind legs forward. Given the context, Stephen was nearly sickened when Applejack's kick produced the sounds of cracking wood. Applejack landed safely on her haunches, using one of her front legs to hold her Stetson in place. When the beast landed, it scrambled to its feet and ran back to the forest with a limp, whimpering like a beaten dog the whole way. In a few more seconds, the howling had died down in the distance. The battle was over, and relieved Stephen collapsed and took his first real breath since his ordeal started. However, the peace only lasted until Applejack got down into his face.
Didn't I tell you to stick close to me?
She shouted.
I thought you were running with me until Applebloom told me y'all were getting chased up the orchard.
She then turned to Applebloom, who by now was already sobbing from shock.
And you, little lady, you know better than to chase after a Timberwolf by yourself. Why didn't you stay with Big Mac?
Applebloom looked at her with watering eyes and tear-streaked cheeks.
Sorry. I just wanted to help Stephen.
Applejack dropped down and hugged her sister close. Stephen caught a glimpse of Applejack fighting to keep her composure before she turned her head down, letting her hat cover her face. Applebloom buried her face into Applejack's belly in muffled sobs.
Now calm down, Applebloom. It's all right now. You're just fine, you hear?
Applejack repeated while petting her sister's mane.
Your heart was in the right place,
said Big Mac.
But if you're helping Stephen, who's helping you?
I should have done something.
Stephen muttered to himself. There was a moment of silence as all eyes turned to Stephen. That statement wasn't intended to be heard. They heard it nonetheless. Applebloom dried her tears with her foreleg. Applejack shot to her feet and stormed over to Stephen.
You're darn tootin' you should have done something.
Applejack put her face right against Stephen's and shoved his head into the ground.
You saw that hungry hunk of sticks coming at my sister, and you stood there like a lump on a log.
Applejack's voice started to crack and her eyes were welling up again.
What if something had happened to her?
If I had a younger sister, I wouldn't have taken her out to chase wolves in the first place, Stephen thought to himself. He chose not to vocalize it. Applejack was already quite upset, and he didn't want to risk being on the receiving end of what she did to that Timberwolf, so he settled on.
I just didn't know what to do.
Applejack's eyes went wide. She stopped pinning Stephen's face and strained her neck. Stephen could practically hear the gears turning in her head.
You're not from around here, are you?
She reminded herself.
I should have stayed back to make sure you didn't get separated.
Her voice was quiet and sincere. She looked back over at Applebloom, who was back on her feet with dry eyes. If anything, she looked concerned for Applejack. Applejack sighed and lowered her head.
It's over now. Let's just go inside, every pony.
With that, Applejack trudged towards the house, Wyona following by her side. As Stephen got to his feet, Applebloom called his attention with a tap on his shoulder.
I'm sorry I got you in trouble, Stephen.
Why would she apologize to the man who was about to watch her get eaten?
No, I'm sorry I couldn't help you.
Applebloom smiled at him.
Oh, that's alright. My big sis is always there to help me out of a pickle. You should come inside. Granny Smith's got a big heapin' victory dinner waiting for us.
Stephen watched Applebloom scamper towards the house. When he looked back up, he was met with Big Mac's gaze. What kind of wrath would the older brother have for him? Stephen prepared himself for the worst. Instead, Big Mac simply nodded and trotted away. With a heavy heart, Stephen followed suit. The food was delicious, there's no denying that. Stephen had never tasted fresh homemade apple pastries before. But he couldn't shake the guilt of freezing up. Mentally replaying the situation on loop, he counted all of the missed opportunities to protect Applebloom. Though he still wasn't sure what he would have done, he was still guilty with the knowledge that he should have done something. What if this hadn't been a dream? Indeed, the Timberwolves were frightening, but this was a dream, for goodness sake. He probably could have taken them on if he had put his mind to it. But if he freezes up so badly when he's dreaming, There's no way he would have fared any better in the real world. Dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon as they finished their feast. Once the light of day was clear, Stephen thanked Granny Smith for everything and began walking back towards the library. He got to the end of Sweet Apple Acres' driveway when he heard Applejack calling him. Turning around, he saw her halfway down the driveway and galloping towards him at full speed.
Wait up!
It didn't take her long to clear the remaining distance.
What's up?
I wanted to come down and see you off. You weren't about to head out without saying goodbye, were you?
I figured you wouldn't want to talk to me after what I did.
There was a long, awkward silence between them. Stephen could tell Applejack was trying to think of something to say, but Stephen beat her to it.
Look, Applejack, I'm really sorry. I don't think I can emphasize enough how sorry I am. All I can say is that I've never been in any kind of fight before. I've never been able to get close to wild animals before, and I've never seen anything like a timber wolf before. I'm not brave, and I'm not cut out for this stuff. I didn't know what to do, so I froze up. I know that was lousy of me, and I feel terrible about it. So again, I'm sorry, and all I can do is hope you'll forgive me.
Applejack took a moment to think.
Well, Apple Bloom didn't get hurt, so I can't be mad at you.
After taking another moment, she continued.
I'm sorry too. I should have stayed with you instead of telling y'all to stay close to me.
But you still managed to come and save me. It's just like you said. What if something happened to Apple Bloom because I couldn't do anything to help?
Now I know not every pony is born brave, but if you want to be brave, you gotta know that real courage is something that you get from a desire to help those you care about, even if it's tough or frightening.
With everything she had said being true, Stephen had nothing left to say for himself. Dejectedly, he looked away, only for Applejack to bring his eyes back to hers with youth.
Now don't you fret. Just keep that in mind and you'll do better next time.
Hopefully there won't be a next time. Last night was the craziest thing ever.
Applejack laughed at the sentiment.
Boy, howdy. You haven't been around here that long, have you?
Stephen's eyes got wide.
Last night wasn't the craziest thing that's ever happened to you?
Not by a long shot, Sugar Cube.
Applejack chuckled. Stephen didn't even want to try and imagine what could be more worse than timberwolves. If this was a lucid dream, it might actually happen. And he couldn't handle any more excitement for a while.
Twilight says you usually disappear around this time in the morning. You gonna be off soon.
If it wasn't the weekend, my alarm would have already woken me up. So I guess I'll be out of here whenever my body decides to wake up.
You coming back later?
I'm not sure. I still don't know what to think of all this.
Well, if you come back, we'll find something to do with our friends that's a little more your speed. What do you say?
I could look forward to that.
Stephen said with a smile.
I'm going to go find a place to hang out and rest a little before I wake up. Thank you for everything.
Anytime, partner.
Applejack smiled and tipped her hat at Stephen. With a goodbye wave, Stephen walked over to the orchard and started making his way towards the library.
And a howling thank you to my Patreons.